nosso principal objetivo é oferecer soluções para um futuro melhor. Coletamos, destinamos, transformamos. Nosso trabalho tem impacto real na natureza, nas empresas e na vida das pessoas. Ampliamos nossa visão para oferecer soluções ecoeficientes que dão vida infinita para recursos finitos. Coletamos, destinamos, transformamos. Cuidamos do futuro, transformando o hoje.
Olá, voltamos agora para a formação.
Hello, we're back to their second panel, ESG, Regenerative, Inclusive, and Resilient Businesses. In this panel, we will have André Valente, Head of Sustainability from Raízen, Guilherme Caran, Biodiversity Economy Manager in Grupo Boticário, and Mosqueira, Vice President of Sustainability and Governmental Relations with Siemens. And now I will pass the floor to Cynthia Wogan, Director of Corporate Communication and Sustainability at WestRock, Brazil. Good morning, Renata. Good morning, everybody. I want to start by thanking you, Sebedes and Renata, for this rich and relevant opportunity to discuss something that's so relevant to our companies and our country and the world. The business world has been changing, and it's in search of a better way to put a price on the risk related to climatic change with these social environmental changes. And this demands that companies have a change in behavior and start declaring their risks and their impacts and their balances. With that, OSG has been transforming the way we invest, and every time, and we're gathering our strength. As the regenerative businesses and the inclusive businesses, they become not only an option, but I think they are a must for those who want to be sustainable and want to sustain themselves as companies as here on in. And not only it's a question of survival, and that's why we're here to talk a little bit about these regenerative businesses, these resilient and inclusive businesses as well. And so I'll start opening our session by passing the floor to André Valente, who will be already presented. He's the head of for sustainability at Raízen. André, the floor is yours. Thank you, Cynthia. Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. My dear panelist friends, my dear friends, it's a pleasure to share this space with you today. Just let me share my screen first. I hope you're able to see my screen. So it's a pleasure again to be here. My name is André Valente. I'm from Raízen, from Sustainability Network. And when I received this invitation, it was impossible to say no, right? Because it's so much connected to our day-to-day lives with our company, what we do in the context that we're inserted in, and how much this topic is relevant. And so it's interesting to be able to share with you of what's been happening in our operations, but also to participate in such a wonderful debate in order to bring this level of knowledge to everyone, and we get to learn from our colleagues as well. So extremely nice to be here today. And without further ado, I just want to be presenting it for you to have an idea what Raízen is about. Raízen is in bioenergy company. Perhaps most of you know one of these three blocks that are integrated. And we have a very large operation of cultivation, of solution for innovation, and for these bioenergy parks. And the access to markets, we have marketing, retail, all the stores, all our operations in airports and biofuel. And so this is a point of access to the market. And in this midst here, we're trying to connect everything because that's what makes us a business that's difficult to replicate, because we're trying to distribute trade, market intelligence, trying to connect the ends and in the field, from the field to, which is a huge transaction that goes into everyone's houses and is part of everyone's lives. And so this is very complex. It's a very upstream. We have about 1 million hectares for sugarcane plantation. And we also have 7,000 gas stations distributed throughout airports as well. And so it's very broad, and that penetrates on our daily lives and the Brazilians' daily lives. And so bringing this into our context to our discussion and talking about the left part of our park that I was talking about before, we have, perhaps there's a lot of public opinion and public knowledge. I think perhaps they're stuck in time. And so we've had to re-educate people in order to talk about the evolution of this operation and how what we know as top of mind on top of our heads is a sugarcane plant that was a plant that has industrial and units that were built more than 100 years ago, going through maintenance and retrofit, but they are active assets that were constructed more than 100 years ago. And we have this image of these plants that produced alcohol, sugar, with very low energy efficiency. And we know that it was very vulnerable in terms of social environmental, because they had to pretty much burn the entire crop to make things happen. And so it was a difficult quality of work, because there was a lot of heat going on. It was a difficult type of work. It was labor conditions were very bad, and it wasn't well integrated. And so this has changed. This is no longer the case. We've tried to re-educate people in this, so that we've migrated into a scenery of a bioenergy park. And what does that mean? What does that mean to our new model of operations? It is a focus to a maximum use of our resources, in this case, sugarcane. And when we say that a plant used to produce alcohol, sugar, and vapor efficiently, if you accelerate in time, you can see that we have a much larger portfolio nowadays. I'll show you in the slide. We optimize these resources with a very much efficient power efficient, and energy is renewable, is sustainable, used, it's being reused in the sugarcane and then to sell to the network and to clean our energetic matrix. And so I think our peak of energy generation is in the drought period. And then energy becomes more expensive because we need more electricity. And so we have this role of also of putting a price on that. And this operation that was highly vulnerable today generates a positive impact on the surroundings, because in addition to be professionalized, there's also a mechanization of this process. And then we stopped the burning of the crops. And what does that mean? So today, the crop, there is no more intentional burning of the crops, but we no longer do it this way. We have an automated process in order to collect the crops and much more efficient. And we got this labor that used to cut the sugar canes, and we migrated them into a work that's much more added value. And last, the other point I want to say is that there is no longer a relationship between the plant and the producer of sugarcane and the destruction of value and a competition for values. This is a very much integrated chain today where we work together with the farmer, with the sugarcane that's processed by us, and the other half is bought by other parties. And what are the working conditions? What are the operation conditions? How am I generating value for this chain in order to ensure loyalty? So he may provide this only to me, but this is also growing, and we're trying to meet the demands of the market. So this is a new scenario, and then one of the main messages that we want to leave you with is that back in time, the old type of plants, they no longer exist. And this is what we want to show you today. An example in practice of how this is happening today. We have a circularity, a huge circularity. Practically, we don't waste practically anything. The sugar cane goes into juice and goes into it becomes pellets that actually replaces carbons and other energetic matrix. And the sugarcane that once became juice, and now there is the biofuel that's also generate biomethane. And so we were able to make our first contract on biomethane, on green ammonia. And so it's a completely remodeled business, and where we're able to show the market the kind of potential that we have, because we're just in the beginning of this evolution. So can you just imagine that the whole of the Brazilian agro business and the energetic industry is able to implement this level of circularity? And then when we talk about sugarcane, there is a very important point here. We have a huge commitment. We have this mantra where renewable doesn't necessarily mean sustainable. It can be renewable with practices that are unsustainable. So since the formation of the company, since the inception, we've tried to do this in a way that our sugarcane, our main resource, needs to meet the very rigorous demands for sustainability in order to enable this business. And that's how we started our journey for certification. Today, with the acquisition of Bio7, we were able to create a new path, but with this, we would able to reach 100% of the industry of the producers of bioenergy parks with certification, Bom Sucro certification. You don't have to be a part of it, but to be honest, the market is very much it's growing. The market still is not very aware of what Bom Sucro certification is, but it's growing, and we needed to somehow replicate this to our chain as well. So this Bom Sucro standard, how we cultivate our own sugarcane. And so we brought this from the inception in solidarity with NGOs, a program in order to elevate the level of sustainability and positive impact of the operations of our producers, of our third-party producers. So once we get to his land, we're able to help them with this partnership with these NGOs. We're able to work together in order to improve their practices, to generate knowledge, to bring tools in order for evolution. And how can we help them with the regenerative part, and how they can do better, and how they can add value. And the practical result of this is that very, very few people know this, but but where there's sugarcane produced today in these municipalities of sugarcane, there's about 80% of these municipalities, this districts are actually seeing an increase in their native vegetation areas with natural vegetation coverage, native. And this is a preservation work, yes, of a forestry code that's very rigorous here in Brazil. We have a very strict legislation of property use here. And I think this program of recovery, it's important because we can see the sugarcane that is thriving. It's a very consolidated culture. And in practice, there's increase in vegetation as well. And another success case is that we're able to see this in numbers. Well, our partners, the sugarcane producers didn't receive 1 cent in order to participate in our program. Actually, he even works more. So this business is evolving together with us. And we have more than 95% of our sugarcane from third parties participating voluntarily in our program, and this number is only increasing. So these are two successful metrics and just show you how we're able to achieve this. And today, I think we're at a moment where we need to better understand this. But we need to put our voice out there to see the positive impact. And last, just to bring a little bit of the general vision of sustainability, perhaps we can talk about this a little in more detail.
Our strategic sustainability package of generating and sharing value with our chain as a whole. We have sustainable materials, and each will have their public commitments. We don't think they're going to last very long. I think we're going to have to revamp them and make them a little more aggressive. And because each of these subjects is gaining a lot of traction in the company, and we know that all of them, in a way, was that it's good to evolve in the company, but in the chain as a whole. But I invite you to know our practices more. It's all on the site. And because there's a lot of interesting stuff that we're doing, which is connected and to the discussion that we have here today. So our annual report here, and so I appreciate the opportunity to talk, and I'm anxious for our discussion. I hope I didn't go too fast and that you were able to see everything. Andre, thank you very much. Even that if you had very few minutes to discuss, but it was a very good material on bioenergy and everything that Rising is doing, and our paradigms and our concepts that need to be reviewed. But now we're going to move on and continue with our discussion. Now I'd like to invite Guilherme Caran, the Biodiversity Economics Manager for the Boticário Group Foundation, to show a little bit about the work of the foundation.
Bom dia, obrigado, Cíntia. Bom dia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Cynthia. I'd also like to thank the opportunity to speak and to participate in such an interesting conversation as this. Let me just set my slides here properly. But it's an honor to be here, and I'd like to go over quickly and practically a little bit about the experience of the foundation that we have the positive impact and for society and the environment, because we know that we can't think of one without the others. We just think of just philanthropy and just the government is not going to solve the problem. So the Boticário Foundation works in conservation of biodiversity for over 30 years by connecting the benefits of conserving this diversity with economy and society well-being. My next slide, I think, helps to show what we're doing, because the famous 17 sustainable objectives are showed here three-dimensionally, highlighting the environment conservation and objectives, which are these four: clean water and sanitation, conservation of ground life, and and climate change. These are the foundation for our society to be able to achieve all the remaining 13 goals with society and the economy. So this is the way we see the conservation of biodiversity. For those who don't know us, we are obviously part of the Boticário Group. We are part of the social investments strategy for the Boticário Group, which has its commitment for 2020, actually 2030, that is, attached to sustainability and ESG as well, and nature conservation. All our commitments, our 16, 17 commitments, that also has to do with OVS, has a specific site for this, and I believe that it's interesting to know what Boticário is doing to reduce and actually have a positive impact for society and for the environment. So within these large groups, Boticário has an objective for carbon neutrality and environmental neutrality, but also to potentialize biodiversity and drive and traceability and transparency in all its processes, and leverage inclusivity as well. So I invite all of you to read more about it, but I'd like to go back to the focus of where we're acting in terms of positive impact projects for biodiversity. And I mentioned quickly that we talk a lot about conserving biodiversity. So we have a management of natural reserves. We maintain 2 in order to maintain the biodiversity in these areas. We work with a national agenda as well through influencing public policy and inspirations with systems that could aid in sustainability and conserving the nature. We also work deeply with engagement. We have 4 areas where we support entrepreneurs that have a positive environmental impacts. Before I go into these 4, I'd like to share this slide that we use a lot. It's a little outdated. It's from 2014, but it's still very relevant to the discussion because it shows that at the time where the companies reported to the UN how much they were investing in conserving biodiversity, the amounts were $50 billion a year. However, the amount estimated for this study for all the countries that are members, signing members of the COP, the amount was a lot higher than that, a lot higher than $50 billion a year. It was more around the lines of 300 to 400 billion dollars to achieve our goals globally, which is 6 times the amount invested initially. And this image also shows in the green bars the amount invested in philanthropy that could double and reach $100 billion a year if everything went well. But even then, we would still be far behind our goal of 300 to 400 billion dollars. So in order to achieve this full total amount, we need private capital. We need businesses delivering and conserving biodiversity and looking at this and having a positive environmental impact. So this helps us strategize and our focus on conserving biodiversity. And so within these territories, these priority territories, and the Maringuava River Basin, the Guanabara Basin, Serra do Mar, Lagamar, and Tombador as well. So for these 3 priority territories, we have actions to support in entrepreneurship with positive impacts to the environment. So if we can understand that we can't generate biodiversity conservation with just public and philanthropy So we need to think in other strategies that support entrepreneurs in these regions so that their businesses can also create biodiversity conservation. And this mission that we understand, this definition of these businesses is will define what these businesses and what we want to leverage and help in these territories. So the businesses that, in addition to the intention, the clear intention, that have a clear intention to address a social environmental problem through its main activity, which whether it's its service or product or etc., and act accordingly to a market logic. So it has to have a business model where the goal is profits, of course, but there has to be an intentionality and a purpose to have a social and environmental positive impact. So this goal is how we're leveraging and working with our partners and entrepreneurs in these areas. This next slide is also interesting because it shows a little bit of the positioning where the group has and has been acting and our instruments, and you can see it on our site as well. And it shows three main environmental values that it can generate. A type 1, which is more related to eco-efficiency, so reducing the negative impact in the environment and society. So then we have more of a type 2 is more of a circular economy and neutrality of negative impacts. And then type 3, which is already generating positive impacts. So in addition to not having a negative impact, we're actually delivering positive impacts to biodiversity conservation, leave the environment better than it was when we first arrived there. So these three values, these three types can be seen as a journey, and not all businesses have the ability to dive directly into type 3, but we're always working towards type 3. And then in two of the areas, the Atlantic forest and in the Bahia Guanabara Basin, we mapped who the entrepreneurs are, what their deficiencies are, and how they can generate positive impacts, what they need in this the reserve. We found over 200 that are already causing positive impacts, and most of them said that needed acceleration programs, resources to leverage their positive impacts. And so we considered what these businesses said. In the Guanabara Basin, we had also several businesses that were in their early stages, their infancies, but and their most they went through the death valley, and but they need to generate more revenue and in order to be able to have a more positive impact. So this mapping, these studies that we did, and then closing my remarks, we've been developing since 2019 the not entrepreneur nature program for positive impacts, and we have partnerships both here in Paraná, the southeast of Brazil, and the south as well. We've had very positive impacts. In 2020, we had this mapping that I showed, and we identified what are the businesses in each region, in the regions, and what their needs were. We had an acceleration programs from 2020 to 2021. And in 2021, we started the third edition, taking businesses from the south and southeast of Brazil. And we had an efforts for Rio, the state of Rio as well, and for acceleration programs, and our program for the Guanabara Bay, which encompasses 17 municipalities. And in order to do, we give mentoring and accelerations, connections, and networking. We also studied their financial mechanisms through regenerative practices and institutes, trade institutes. We have financial institutes for these areas, focusing on good and cheap credit that can meet their needs, and where they're able to have a more positive impact. And so this was a brief summary of what we've been doing in order to support businesses and so that the positive impacts are ever more prevalent in society and not just generating revenue, but also have positive impacts. So thank you very much for your time, and I'd like to move on and keep talking about this more. So thank you very much. Yes, alliances and partnerships, and this is these are paths that the pandemic definitely helped us learn. So now I'd like to talk with André Valente, actually Pablo Fava, CEO of Siemens Infrastructure, and we'll talk about being of Luis, how to be more resilient as well. So good morning. Thank you for being here. I'd like to thank you, my colleagues and everybody who's listening. It's an honor to be here and to hear everybody participating and in a meeting that's where so many opinion setters are present. So we're talking about ESG and resilient businesses. Can you put my slides on screen, Enrique, please?
Já está, Luiz.
Tá? Você passa para o próximo, por favor?
Could you move on to the next slide, please?
Deixa eu aumentar aqui para eu poder enxergar. Bom,
well,
pouquinho sobre a Siemens e como a gente
talking a little bit about Siemens and how we fit into sustainable practices, we can see the mega trends which are considered when we define our objectives and strategic objectives. And within these trends, I'd like to stick to climate change because it's a topic that's very critical and sensitive for Siemens as a company and to all of us as a society and individuals. And I'd like to use a quote by Kofi Annan that says that we are the last generation that can do something in order to prevent this result in this disaster that we don't want, this negative result. And Siemens as a country, businesses on digital and industrial businesses and smart cities and mobility, we're working to revert this trend. And I think the scenario is not as negative as we might think. We have reasons to be optimistic because we see some changes, some posture changes, some attitude changes. Like in Germany, where we saw those floods in Austria and Germany and the fires in Canada, the US, and even in Brazil, and this dust clouds in the countryside in the state of Sao Paulo, we need to start working to revert this trend. So China has a 2060 goal of decarbonization. The European Union set their goal for 2050. The US is back at the discussion table and they have goals set for 2030. So we have reason to be optimistic. The next slide, please. Well, here we see some of the challenges that Brazil faces when we talk about ESG. Brazil is going through its worst water crisis in its history, and we're very dependent on hydropower plants. And 39% of the water is in Brazil when we talk about public sanitation and water supplies is lost through waste through the distribution system. So it's a huge loss percentage. And when we talk about the participation of women in management positions, we have only 3% of women in high key positions. So we have a long way to go. Cyber attacks, we've seen an exponential growth of episodes in 2021. We're just half of the year, and we've already surpassed the 2020. So we believe that we're going to lose $100 billion in cyber attacks by 2023. And when we talk about corruption perception in the International Index Transparency, and when we're talking, Brazil is ranked 94th. And also when we talk about Brazil's position in the global ranking of professional qualification, we are 59th. So we have a lot of room to grow and improve. Next slide, please. So at Siemens, since how do we look to tackle these? So we see digitalization as efficiency and productivity. It's a way to achieve both. So when we have intelligent buildings, production, and connected mobility, we have a healthier life and more sustainable life. So Siemens wants to have a very strong presence in physical lives and equipments and Siemens solutions in various industries, and we want to connect this physical world to the digital world, to the cloud, to help our customers to extract the greatest amount of information and able to make their best decisions for their businesses.
And now talking specifically about ESG, Cynthia mentioned in the opening that today this is a matter of survival for companies. Although this may be a concept that's relatively new, in the beginning, in its inception, it was something that was nice, it was cool for the companies to have, it was a reason to be different. Today, it's a matter of survival. If you do not embrace these ESG concepts today, you will not survive in the market. So we know that companies that embrace these concepts, they have better financial results, they have more engaging collaborators, they have clients who appreciate the company more, better net promoter score indexes. And so it's a matter of survival. And when we talk about two executives today, we talk about us executives here in the company. I've read a statistical report that says that in the United States in 2017, when they first conducted this research, 400 high executives were removed from their roles, from their respective boards, because they failed in taking measures for inclusion. And so when we talk about ESG, we talk about survival of the companies and survival of those executives who want to keep themselves updated in the market. If you do not embrace these concepts, you will not survive. Next, please. And here we talk about how Siemens has used these ESG concepts in goals, in KPIs that are used on a daily basis. Today, on the 24th of July, on our Capital Market Day, our degree is a decarbonization, ethics and governance, efficient resources, equity, and employability. And so this is how we need to use these KPIs for ESG on a daily basis in our reality. So when we talk about decarbonization, we're talking about net zero operations till 2030, and that in Germany, in our headquarters and throughout the world. But here in Brazil, we have a more aggressive target. However, we will reach net zero in 2025. When we talk about ethics, it's to train all of our collaborators to promote an ethical environment that respects laws and standards, and to train all of our collaborators in person, 100% of these collaborators every 3 years. When we talk about governance, governance is to ensure that our supply chain will also be adhering to our ESG program. And an important point is to live this in practice, that all of our executives may be remunerated in a long term with ESG. And so to all executives at Siemens, they will be compensated in a long term in stocks, but only if they follow through these targets that are related to ESG. And the next slide, when we're talking about resource efficiency, to use these resources in an efficient way, we're talking about taking into consideration eco-design and circular economy in the design of all of our products and all of our solutions. Equity, among others, KPIs, is to have at least 30% of women in leadership programs till 2025. That is a firm commitment that Siemens has. We are on our path to making that happen, to making that 30% happen, and it's a firm commitment. And finally, employability. Perhaps it might be the item that I like talking about the most, because we know that the world is going through a technological transition, and what we've learned in the university back then perhaps might not be the skills and abilities that we need that are essential from here on in. But what we've learned in our work till this day perhaps might not be the ideal and essential skills and abilities in order to apply into the future. So Siemens has the commitment to keep workability, employability going, train our collaborators through these trainings. We're able to navigate through these transitions and always keep ourselves updated with what's most modern in terms of technology. Next slide, please.
Bom, aqui são alguns projetos.
Here are a few of the projects. I won't be going into too much detail here, but these are some of the projects that Siemens has taken part of, where sustainability is at the top of its priority. I won't be going into much details because of the time span, but we're talking about a smart city in the outskirts of Bahia, a city that's totally connected, new plan and connected to nature. Solutions for stocking up power and battery energy, clean energy. A project, huge project with BASF in Germany, where we make digital transformation happen in their largest production site, and Mercedes-Benz project with Mercedes-Benz in order to modernize and update their plant in Berlin. And so this has spanned out into another 30 plants, Mercedes-Benz plants throughout the world. Clean energy to the island of the Azores in Spain, where through micro green and storage ability, we also are able to offer clean energy, and a project in Italy, in Rome, for urban mobility. I think these are great examples of how we're living in this reality, these concepts of ESG on a daily basis. And now the final, next slide, in order to summarize, this is our ambition here at Siemens, okay? What we expect, what we hope to contribute, what we want to deliver is to transform people's lives through technology with a purpose, to understand that a sustainable business is a good business and the only possible business, and to be an example of a strength in order to create value for all stakeholders. I think that's Siemens' main message. And with that, I end my presentation, and I thank you all.
Muito obrigada, Luiz.
Thank you, Luiz. And now it's my time, I guess, to do an overview of the presentations, right? And how we deal with the regenerative businesses. So I'll be sharing my screen here as well.
Acredito que vocês já estão vendo, certo?
I believe you're already seeing my screen.
Perfeito.
Am I right? Okay, perfect. Thank you. WestRock is a company
Em papel e embalagens.
that works with paper and packaging. It is the second largest company in paper and packaging in the world because it's B2B. It doesn't have a brand in the market that is as strong to the consumer market. However, it's very much consolidated with the business market. Here in Brazil, we've been here 79 years already, and we have a solid base in sustainability throughout all of these years. And here in Brazil specifically, we have a business that's 100% integrated that starts with our forests. This is a real picture of one of our forests. This forest here is a preserved forest. And these planted forests, they are a source of raw material for our paper, which then becomes our packaging. And in order to present this in a very synthesized manner on how our business works and how our regenerative business works based on circular economy, I'm going to be showing you a quick video, 15-second video, okay? Sustainability, our role in the world. We are a circular economy in action. We work with virgin fibers that are renewable, responsible, they turn into high-perform paper, cardboard, corrugated paper. And then we have collaborative shipping that reduces the emissions of CO2, compost, recycled fibers. So you can see it's a whole circular economy system going on, and we go beyond and we try to help our clients to be more sustainable. Our boxes actually plant trees. WestRock. We are very proud to say that our packages, they plant trees. While we plant these trees in a cyclical way and renewable way, these trees during their life cycle, they are removing thus CO2 from the atmosphere, because this CO2 remains in the trunks, in the leaves, and the roots of the trees, or while they're being processed in our paper plant, they were incorporated into our products. And in a cycle that uses recycled fibers as well as virgin fibers. And so we work with these two fronts of circular economy, and specifically talking about regeneration of the regenerative cycle, which is the main topic here at hand. We have all the main principles of circular economy put into practice, which is the reduction, and then to keep the materials and the products in use and resources in use. And last, the regeneration. Here we have regeneration under composting, under the removal of CO2, and that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit more. So our native forests, like I said before in the beginning, in my first slide, I like talking about this a lot. I like looking at these native forests. This picture for me represents, it's easy for us to understand, represents everything. It's easy for us to understand and talk about our business. We plant in mosaics. I don't know if you can see my mouse clicker here, my pointer. So you can see here, these are the native forests. They are preserved as well as conserved, depending on the area. Here you can see the planted forests, but this area here hasn't been deforested. When WestRock started its use, we obeyed the rules of the forests that were already preserved. And here we see something that's actually very easy to see, the conservation happening of the water resources that's happening, because they take place in superficial waters as well as underwater ways. And so we see we have more than 80 farms in the south of Brazil. We have more than 2,000 riverbeds that are preserved. And so different from what actually exists in our imagination, that that our role is to actually to cut down trees. No, actually, it's the opposite. We plant. 80% of our business comes from these planted forests. We conserve these native forests. So it's just the opposite. And during this cycle, these trees are planted, and you can see that they're delivering and doing their best when we talk about regenerating the environment. And also, we have just, I think last week or in the beginning of this week, we have just received we're very proud to have received an award from the Environmental Institute of Santa Catarina, where we've proven that how much our territories of planted forests and the water is equivalent to the quantity of water that exists normally in the water in a non-planted forest. So this is actually something very relevant, very important, especially in this moment where we're talking about water crisis, water shortage, and then everything that brought us to this crisis. And so we're very proud to have this sustainable business and regenerative business. These forests, these native forests and planet forests, they are also a natural habitat. Like I've showed you in the past, in the previous, we have these ecological corridors here where they have animals and they go to the planet forests and to the native forests. And so we've been looking out for these species for 26 years now. They've been cataloged. We've cataloged about 60 species of animals and plants, flora and fauna, and a lot of them are in extinction. And we are trying to preserve these. So this is actually one of a perspective, a picture of one of our forests and one of these species that are actually in extinction. We already talked about the regeneration, which is the third principle of circular economy, and the removal of carbon from the atmosphere that our forests promote. When we talk about it, it's extremely relevant. We have a balance of carbon in the year 2020. We've possibly removed more than we've emitted through in our chain of 431,000 tons of CO2. This means that all of our operations in Brazil of production have been offsetted, and we've actually been given a, quote unquote, a credit for tons in the environment. Our stock of carbons in our trees, like I said, in the trunks, in the roots, in the leaves, they go from 6.5 million tons of CO2 and stocked. And it's very well stocked, and it's not circulating in the atmosphere. And we've also done a calculation that's conservative. It's a number, but just for didactic purposes here, I want to help to make a reflection that every minute our forest removes a ton of CO2 from the environment. So this is just for reflection. We've been here, what, about an hour and a half now, I guess, a little less than 50 minutes, sorry. And in these 50 minutes, less 50 million tons of CO2 in the world because of our trees. And these planet forests, obviously, once they're harvested, they are planted again. And then we insist on the use of technology and innovation so that these trees may produce more plants in the same area, demanding less natural resources, producing more paper with the same quantity, with the same amount of fibers, and they're able to grow faster. This means that if they grow faster, they're able to absorb CO2, more CO2 from the atmosphere. There is a proven number already of 36% more CO2 removal than when we compare to other planet forests in Brazil, which is very relevant, and there's still more to do. We still invest on research and investment in these forests. And here, I've brought you another image that came to me actually yesterday. This is something that I'm going to be using actually in our panel tomorrow. It's an example. I talked a lot about our forests and how they're harvested and they're planted, obviously. And in the production of paper, there is a residue, and this organic residue is actually turned into compost. And this compost is then donated to the community of Três Barras, who then plants using this compost. And this compost, as you can see by the size of the vegetables here, so the community plants and they benefit themselves, and they are benefited, and we've helped with the nutrients that were removed back then when the forest demanded these nutrients, and these nutrients then go back into the earth, into the soil, and then the quality of these vegetables is just wonderful. And we buy these vegetables so that they may actually feed and nurture our employees in our plant. And so it's a circular economy. We think that this is just a principle, but it's actually in practice. It happens in practice so that we may be able to achieve a different future than what's actually being designed up to now. These are virtuous cycles. These are closed cycles. This also happens with our forests, but that's how WestRock works in a broad way. And in order to do this, it's an essential condition that we have a diverse and inclusive environment. And for that to happen, there is a segment that usually there's not a lot of women working in it, especially in the south of the country. There is not a lot of Black people. And so we've started hiring these people, women and Black people, more intentionally in order to absorb this and be more diverse. We have a target until 2030 to have 50% of women actually in our organization. And that's a huge challenge actually, but it's intentional. And this is a real picture of an employee, of a woman that's working there. And last, we can see that in some of our districts and municipalities that we're inserted in, there is a huge social inequality happening. And so we've tried launching various capacitation programs in a community. This is one of them. It is a project Formare from YOSP Foundation. And this, again, we've done the intentional hiring of people who are Black and 70% who are women. Because in Pacajus, where this project is now underway, women do not have access to work. And so we've intentionally done this, and we were able to reach this percentage of Black people and women. And at the end of the day, at the end of the process, of this capacitation process, to empower these young people, these young minds, so that we're able to retain them in our company as they are more and more prepared for the business.
So this was just an overview of how WestRock is regenerative, inclusive, and resilient. And now I'd like to move on to our questions. And I wanted to agree with our colleagues and our group that we are as brief and direct as possible with our answers, so that we're able to have at least one interaction with each of you. We've already been going, we're sort of going over our allotted time, okay? So I'm going to start with Andre. And Andre, the World Economic Forum shows that over half of global production, so $44 trillion, is moderately or highly dependent on nature. But there is a lot of ignorance, so to speak, and a taboo when we're talking about nature, that it's not a business subject. And but we see that it's actually the other way around. So we're very highly dependent on natural resources and nature. So when we're talking about renewable energy and the benefits that we see from the origin to consumption, so when we see biogenic sources, and like you explained very well in your presentation, there are three pillars of sustainability: social, in as well as profits, but also in the environment. I also wanted to know if this shared responsibility between population, government, and business, is it a challenge, and how you've been managing these cultural aspects that you've explained of the old plants and the new plants. And so how is Rising doing in managing all this? Yeah, you mentioned something along the lines of ignorance, which is a lack of knowledge, and it's very comfortable for intentional ignorance, but it's a point that bothers us deeply, because it makes technical discussions, very difficult for adequate solutions for energy supply. So I'm very passionate. It's always very passionate and very little technically, very little technical foundations. So we need to improve this, and depending on the energy source, so electrical vehicles uh, are much more uh, advantageous than the traditional vehicles. So when you extrapolate with the demand for mining inputs for the energy production, so how do you do this sustainably? But so we have this triangle, and that number that we see, a zero emissions vehicle. There is no such thing. We need to improve the discussion, because if we just keep talking about future solutions and compare with present solutions, there's a disconnect. So if we see how our sector is going to be 50 years from now, and how changes will be consolidated, of course, we see a lot more benefits that we can bring from which is already public knowledge. So if we extrapolate this for deforestation and social impacts, we know that we have 100% traceability for our sugarcane, and we know from each farm that it comes from. This is invaluable. So when we know that all agricultural products are shipped to Europe. This is the government's problem, but I think it's also a shared responsibility. So from even from last year, we've gotten a lot closer to policymakers, national and international policymakers, with an open heart. And so I'm conducting a study with a specific goal. Is there any information that could be useful for you as a regulator, as a legislator, and where I can maybe uh, help create something new that you haven't even thought of yet, and how we can improve multilateral agreements that you're developing. So when tackling this and having these important discussions, we need to have current data of what's happening on the ground. So we can't hope to have a discussion of something, a package of academic studies from 15 years ago that's not going to yield positive results is if we had current data. So we're trying to work integrally with the government, and so it's the equation of 1+1=3. So we're trying to add value when we're connected, and biofuels and regenerative businesses is totally connected to this agenda. So I agree with you completely that this is a shared responsibility. And once again here, this is an improved continuous improvement. So it's a win-win situation for everyone, but it needs to be based on knowledge and based on facts and current data. So thank you, Andre. So now I would like to talk to you a little bit about something, the repercussions that we've seen for COP15. And we've been seeing a lot of COP26 and climate change. Thank goodness. We need to see this discussion. This needs to be at the forefront, and it's the first of November is when it's going to happen. But within 10 days, we have the first phase of COP15, which is biological biodiversity, and we're not hearing a lot about it. And there's very little repercussion. The media doesn't understand that this is a very relevant issue. And then within this context, we have an example which is extremely relevant for COP15, which is divided in two. But in April of next year, we're going to have a participation of the business sector with an active voice. And it's an important moment where we see a shared responsibility of biodiversity, so that we're able to change history and change the narrative. So I wanted to know what your expectations for the foundation and the Boticário group for this objective. And even though it doesn't have its due visibility from the media. Thank you, Cynthia. So yeah, definitely this objective is extremely important. We're talking about sustainability for the next decade. So if we talk about the last agreement, the 20 goals that we had, we accomplished 6 of the 20 goals. So we need to do a lot better in the next decade. The panel here was said that was mentioned that we are the last generation that can change the negative course that history is moving through. So I think these changes are even more relevant within the discussion for CDB and biodiversity. And CEBEDS has been doing a very interesting project with something that Boticários is to support the Brazilian objectives and Brazilian actions for these objectives. And I see very interesting goals for the private sector and companies, where companies have to evaluate and monitor and report all their impact and their dependence on natural resources and nature. So I think there's room for more detail and better defined, and countries and companies need to include this domestically. This is another challenge. We can't just have a macro level, but there's a window of opportunity that's very interesting, and there's no way back. So we're not just talking about the company's dependence in terms of strategies to contribute with biodiversity. We're talking about operational risks for companies and industries and value chains that are enormous, that can't operate without water and soil and pollinators and famous ecosystemic services that are supplied by conserved areas. So there's a huge risk, and companies need to generate sustainability and look at their value chains and look outward as well, because there's a macro and global space, which is very interesting. But how do we generate in smaller and medium-sized businesses that have positive impacts that can be scalable and grow throughout the next decade? Because I understand that a lot of the companies, larger companies, are participating in these discussions, but the medium and smaller companies, where they have a lot of opportunity and see and have a positive impact, they also need to be connected and participate in these discussions. And that's also something that we've been trying to do through our programs, and have them participate in the value chain of large companies that are discussing this globally. So it's a very interesting opportunity. There's no turning back. And so the positive impact is already a competitive edge that companies have, and this needs to be improved. Thank you very much. And lastly, Luis, I had several reflections about Siemens, and I must confess that I didn't know all the work that you have been doing, and I was very impressed. And I was thinking of how we got to this point today in this industrial revolution, where man connected uh, development with carbon emissions. So we know that today the businesses and governments need to detach their development to carbon emissions, and how technology can help this, and how can it help us grow sustainably. And we know that it's possible, and and that's very important. And Siemens has close to 200 years of its history, and so back then we already had a sustainable posture and attitude. I'm not going to compromise the survival of my company for short-term profits. So this is the mentality that we need to have today, and of how companies are going to survive throughout time. So sustainability is embedded in our DNA, and Siemens is a company that can help its customers to achieve their digitalization goals. It's a tool for efficiency and sustainable businesses. The pandemic that was helped us accelerate this process. We were on a digitization process, but the pandemic accelerated this. So we see paths of how we can help our customers to navigate this path. So we need to internalize this and make our collaborators aware, and our management and our stakeholders, that this is the only way possible. And how do we do this? It's through our individual and collective commitment, and be here, for instance, and fighting for us to have public policies that are positive is one way to be a transforming agent, be one to generate and create transformations. So this is Siemens's collaboration as a company and as part of the civil society. Thank you very much, Luis. We close here our discussion. I would like to leave a reflection with the last comment that Luis made, which is this need to reflect and do things differently, and challenge yourselves, and make partnerships, and find ways to grow differently than the way we've been growing, how the world has grown up to this point, and the solutions that are not always easy, but they are on the table for discussion, open for discussion, definitely. So I'd like to thank you very much. So Renato, next time I'm going to ask for 2 hours for us to talk a lot more. So I'd like to thank everybody who's still watching us and our colleagues and my colleagues and especially Sebeds.
Cíntia, obrigada pela
Thank you very much,
moderação.
Cynthia, for the moderation. It was a very enriching experience, and we've received on the chat several compliments, and I'm going to try to put your suggestion forward. So 2 hours next year. So, and with that in mind, we'll be back at 2 p.m. Talking about water resources and water safety. Until then.